Hey everybody, and welcome to Party Up with Paizo, brought to you by Dragons and Stuff. I'm Evil GM JimJam, over on Dragons and Stuff, which is a weekly actual play live stream of Pathfinder. Today, I've gathered up some fellow game masters to talk about running games and the many joys of being a GM. We are live on Facebook and Twitch, so please add your comments, questions, and GM tips to the chat, and we will do our best to address them as we move forward. Before we get into things, though, let's meet our guests. First up, we have John Compton. John is the organized play lead developer at Paizo and oversees the creative content of the Pathfinder Society Role-Playing Guild, the Starfinder Society Role-Playing Guild, and the Pathfinder Adventure Card Guild. Formerly an archaeologist and teacher, John is passionate about teaching role-playing games to others and writing archaeological context into chronologically ambiguous dungeons. In addition to all of his other responsibilities, John avidly writes and develops rules, content, adventures, and campaign lore for both the Pathfinder and Starfinder role-playing games. Hey John, it is good to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Sitting in with John, we have Amanda Hamon Kunz. Amanda is a two-time Emmy Award-winning tabletop game designer, developer, and editor, the co-designer of the Starfinder RPG, and the author and co-author of dozens of our Pathfinder RPG titles, and the development coordinator at Paizo. In addition to loving spooky tales and waxing nerdy about fantasy world building, she has spoken extensively about intersectional feminism in relation to gaming. Hey Amanda, welcome to Party Up. It's good to see you. How are you today?
Great, Jim. Thanks so much for having us on.
No problem. Thanks for being here. Finally, last but not least, we are talking with Dragons and Stuff's own Ben Burch. Ben can be seen as the lovable Sir Quigley every Friday night on Dragons and Stuff, as well as in the greatest medieval fantasy comedy series of all time, Walking in Circles. In addition to playing Squire Quigley, Ben recently decided to step into the GM seat on his own during his recent national tour of the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer musical. Ben took on the task of running over 30 hours of game for two different beginner groups. Hey Ben, how are you? How you doing? It's not Friday and we're together. How's that?
I know. It's fantastic. I love being here. I love doing stuff. So, yeah, I'm happy. I'm always happy.
Yeah, happy. All right. As I mentioned, we want to talk to you guys in the chat as well. So if you have any questions to ask about GMing epic games, please post them so we can answer them. Don't hold back on your own tabletop tips or suggestions either. We're here to discuss running a good game together, as a team, a GM dream team, if you will. While the chat warms up, I do have a couple of questions of my own. First, for our developer friends at Paizo, I wanted to talk about house rules. Many tables have them, and I've been getting a ton of questions on Dragons and Stuff about the house rules that I play with and why I choose to do so. But I think it would be really interesting to hear from you guys what house rules you play with at your own tables, since you guys are actually the people responsible for the rules as they're written. Or maybe you actually hate house rules. I don't know, but I want to know. So, John, let's start with you. Enlighten me. What do you think about house rules? Do you play with them yourself, and which ones do you use?
Sure. A lot of the games that a lot of my core group, we kind of joined up by playing Pathfinder Society Organized Play together. And so we did a lot of very rules-heavy, rules-strict sort of rules interpretation. Mm-hmm. So when it came time to do home games together, we started saying, well, why don't we just loosen things up? Or, oh, wow, we have to keep on being the good guys and the ambassadors for a game in the gaming stores and be nice people. What if we just run an evil campaign? Things like that.
Yeah.
So we don't tend to introduce many house rules so much as we tend to have like beginning of campaign agreements. For example, we might say, wow, we sure do know that guy can play really overpowered characters and this person tends not to. What if we all just agree going into this particular adventure path to build characters who would be B level, not A plus or anything like that, but let's design for a certain level so we at least know that there's not one person showboating the entire time and the others being left in the dust. That's about the extent of the house rules that we tend to do. Otherwise, it's something happens and we look at each other, we come up with a solution, we nod sagely, and we move on.
That's cool. So it's less house rules and more like setting parameters for your game that kind of change the way it develops over time, that sounds pretty cool. Amanda, I know that you worked extensively on Starfinder, and that's a really new system. Do you find that when you're running that you still tend to modify things, or since it's new, do you find that it's easier to just stick to the way it is until you become more comfortable with it?
So because it was new, I ran, and especially sort of before the game even came out, I had home groups of friends where we would just play little one-shots and things like that. And part of it was sort of testing the rules, but also part of it was, hey, these people are really stoked about the rules system, and they're folks I've played with forever. Let's sort of get them in on the thing. After we've already gotten everything figured out and nailed down as far as a publication perspective. There's a lot of sort of like looking things up or like reading people the specific wording of the rules because it is different than Pathfinder, and although it's sort of based on a very similar chassis, there are some key sort of differences, and there are some entirely new subsystems and sub rules in the game. So even if I felt like I didn't necessarily need to look it up as the GM, I did a lot of opening up the book and showing them, okay, this is how this works, and explaining it to them to make sure that they as players knew what it was like to play going forward. So in that case, there really wasn't a lot of house rules, with the few exceptions where there was a little bit of things that did sort of need clarification and errata later on. I just made a call on the fly, and we just kind of kept going for the sake of that particular experience at that particular table. But yeah, my approach to house rules is very similar to what John's is, in that everybody sort of has that initial buy-in at the table that they want to run a fun game, and everybody is playing a story and building a story together. And it's not about one character totally taking over the spotlight. It's not about a character who might be, mechanically, less competent build, totally being left behind in the dust. I have absolutely had times where somebody's character was very overpowered, and something sort of slipped by me as the GM that was being disruptive. Actually you. I'm thinking more about some of the characters my husband has played in the past, but I've absolutely had conversations where I've taken a player aside after a session and said, this character is absurd. I should never have let this or this option in there that is totally taking over the show. I'm going to kill your character next session. And every time the response has been like, yeah, that's fair.
See, you have a much more mature response to that now than I did when I was first GMing, because it was like, you start out like middle school or high school games, and it's, oh, right, we still need to kind of nail down some of these social skills that a GM and even a whole playing group should have. Like, when I was GMing in high school, it would be, oh, you have an overpowered character. I'm going to kill this character. I'm not going to tell you until I do it.
Yeah.
But I'm clearly going to design these things that are built to be the scissors to your paper, and then watch as the blood flies. And that's not necessarily conducive to a long-running campaign or a long-range friendship, but it's certainly one of those lessons that you kind of have to learn on your own and then figure out where the comfort zone is. Which, as far as those early campaign decision or agreements go, even just consent, as far as what certain topics are going to be in your campaign, if you iron out a lot of those like social ills and social conflicts that might come up early on, all you're left with are minor mechanical things that, they might determine whether or not Sir Quigley dies in a horrible pool of blood. But honestly, we'll all be having fun doing it because we have agreed beforehand that Quigley's death is going to be for the entertainment of our audience.
Yeah. So well, Ben, I actually wanted to turn to you for a second, because you actually just recently ran you had played with me for a while on the show, but you just recently ran your first games, and you had new players. Did you find that you wanted to add your own spin to the system and play with more loose rules, or did you find that you were more comfortable sticking to the rules as they're written?
Well, I kind of a little bit of both, because I find that I really enjoy the rules, and so whenever something would happen, it would take me a moment, and I would go and check and really find out if I was doing it correctly, or if for the most part, I would just lie about it until after the session, and then I would look up and make sure I was running it correctly or not running it correctly. But there were also a lot of times when I would say, I really do like this house rule that JimJam created, or I also listen to the Glass Cannon podcast, and so one of the things that they do is that they throw in bottle caps just whenever they feel that a character has done something really cool. And I thought that was a great way to encourage players, not only in creating characters that are really fun, but also in really getting down to fun, interesting role-playing aspects. I gave out more of those during role-playing than I would anything that they did in the actual combat. And I think that house rules should be designed to help your players have more fun, rather than just, let's focus on being a GM and bringing characters down that are OP, sort to say, rather than bringing those characters that were not doing so hot, that were low down, that are more about role playing, and really bringing them up with fun house rules that really benefit their play style as well, so that everybody can have a lot of fun.
That's awesome. You actually have it looks like a kindred spirit in the chat. Melanie Seals says that she just GM'd her first session last Friday. I helped out another DM and did a PFS run of Confirmation. So somebody else stepping into the ring, which is always great, because I find that there are so many people who would play Pathfinder, but they go, but we can't find anybody to run it. And I always say,
right?
Look, if you can't find anybody to run the game, then get the rule book and start looking through it and run the game yourself, because otherwise nobody's going to do it. Like, you got to step up and do it. I remember telling you that, Bet. I remember having a discussion, because you were talking about wanting to do more shows other than Dragons and stuff, and I was like, dude, that's fine, but I'm stretched thin running this one game. If you want another game going, you better learn the system and start running yourself.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the nice advantages of organized play, is because there's a different set of players and a different GM every time. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to switch in and just GM a single session, and then you don't have to do it again a long time if you don't want to. Or you can GM a whole bunch if you like, and if you need a break to play for a bit, that's totally fine. Sometimes the biggest difficulty in deciding to step up to GM is realizing that, oh gosh, you might be locked in for a really long time to doing this thing you don't even know if you like doing yet. So try, do a one-shot, do something that's only like 3 sessions, and make a neat story of it, then wrap it up and be done.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great way to sort of get past that fear of commitment for it. Because another thing that'll happen too is maybe you'll run those couple of sessions, decide you don't really like running it, but one of your players is like, hey, that actually looks really cool. I want to step up and do it. And now you have somebody else who's going to try their hand at running the game. So it can lead to good things for certain. I actually had another question, Amanda, maybe you'll have more insight on this since you were so closely tied to the development of Starfinder, but as you know, we have Pathfinder and we've got the Starfinder system. We have these 2 worlds. You have this fantasy world setting and the sci-fi. Do you find that you have to, when you're running those games, when you're switching between those 2 settings, do you find that there are any specific GM styles or tips or anything that makes that you prefer to use when you're running one setting versus another, even if the rule sets seem to be sort of similar?
So really, the biggest thing for me, and this applies to not only GMing, but also to designing and developing, is when I'm switching between the 2 systems, the biggest thing is sort of a mindset change. There is a huge difference between writing for a traditional fantasy setting like Pathfinder, as opposed to future science fantasy, millennia, literally untold millennia in the future of, the Galarian solar system in Starfinder. And so it's really about just kind of like taking a little chunk of time, whether that's a few minutes or whether that's, 30 minutes of watching a TV episode, but just sort of getting into the fictional background of that genre. Essentially, that's something that I struggled with very, very early on as a freelancer before I was even on the design team for Starfinder, which was just like, I've been writing for Pathfinder for years. I've been playing and running Pathfinder and various other D20 systems set in a medieval fantasy world for years. And so I'm a fan of science fantasy and I know a lot about the genre, but I haven't actually worked professionally in it. And so what tripped the switch for me was to just sort of like sit down and have a brainstorm session. I was actually writing spells at the time, and to come up with what would be cool, like what is a cool futuristic thing that has no analog whatsoever to Pathfinder, that is a trope of the genre that you see in Star Trek or Star Wars or Firefly or any of the futuristic types of sci-fi movies, films, whatever media. And I came up with this huge list that's in my Moleskine, and that ended up being the way for me to switch into the mindset of, okay, I'm developing and designing for Starfinder. And after that, I didn't have any trouble whatsoever getting into that and making sure that, things weren't like weird and out of, like it just out of the genre for what Starfinder needed. So, as a GM, I definitely recommend taking some time, sitting down, reading through the setting chapter that's in the Starfinder core rule book. Like I said, maybe watching like an episode of one of your favorite sci-fi types of shows and just getting into the mindset of, okay, this is far future, this is science fiction. There's some fantasy involved, but it's not, wizards and sorcerers and, those types of characters. This is its own distinct thing. And really just doing that, I think, can just get you prepared for answering some of those questions and being just able to improvise as a GM the way you need to for a game like Starfinder.
I think part of it's also. Oh yeah.
I was gonna say from the chat, I had somebody that I recognized from our audience over at Dragons and Stuff. Benjamin Snyder is saying, I know the Paizo ACG has some cards, and then they deleted the comment while I was reading it.
Oh, okay.
So don't worry, I got it back. Benjamin Snyder saying, I know Paizo ACG has some cards we have to house rule, like Arboreal Blight could wipe the party the way the card is worded. House rules are good when it stops your party from being murdered. Yeah, I think that sometimes rules as written, it's actually interesting. I find that sometimes there is more debate about rules as they're written and interpreting the language than there is about just a rule that a GM makes up on the fly or a way that they like to do things. It seems that when they're codified, people like to get really, really lawyery about it and like, well, actually, it could be made to read this way, and it becomes this whole like. The hugest arguments I've ever had are about rules as they're written, and definitely not about rules that I just made up on the fly. It's just weird that way. And then another person from our... Oh, go ahead.
I think that that's one of the dangers of house rules sometimes is also that you can get so used to using your group's house rules that you start to believe that those are the rules, and that's
right. Yep.
And that's where people tend to run into conflict with each other between different groups. Is
that's true.
What do you mean you don't run it this way? This is of course the real way. This is how our group has always run it. Your group is clearly doing it wrong.
Yeah. Just recently there was.
I think when rules are codified. Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying just recently there was a situation I had with Ben's character where I was convinced that the rules were one way because that's just how I remembered them, and I went and looked and I was like, oh, actually, we can't build Squire Quigley that way because you don't get your feats on that scale like I thought you did. So, oops,
We messed up. Oops.
Made a mistake, but it happens.
Yeah.
But in those situations, for me, it's all about my word is law, and so
Ben the tyrant.
Exactly, I'm definitely a tyrant. There were a couple of times my players looked at me and said, "Are you sure that's how it is?" And I went, "Yep, I'm 100% certain if that's how it is." And then I looked it up afterwards, and they will never know if it was or if it was not.
Yeah, and that's a really good strategy when you're running the game itself, is to say,
right.
Okay, I'm pretty sure this is how it goes. We're work with it this way. If you feel that this is seriously going to change things, you look it up between turns so that you're ready when it's your turn again, and we can, if we need to make a change, we can. Otherwise, let's just roll with this and keep the action moving.
Yeah,
totally. I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna say anything to keep pace up, keep it going.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sort of along those lines, one of the biggest fallacies that people tend to fall into, they're so concerned with rules as written and what the intention of the designers are, and that the words on the page can never be wrong. And honestly, that really, unless you're playing in an organized play setting, that really doesn't matter. It's all about the GM and the GM's game and the way that they want their world to work and the way that they want the story to go and the way that they the things that they want the characters. Even if you get something wrong as a GM, unless it's like a game-breaking type of thing, or unless it's some sort of like, bad faith GM fiat type of thing, which I don't think is a good idea, you can just as the GM say, no, that's the way it works. Or, there's a reason there's a GM screen. I personally don't use a GM screen very often just because I don't like the physical barrier between myself and the players, but dice fudging, a lot of people really think that, that's a huge no-no because that's not how the game is supposed to be played. As a GM, you have every tool at your disposal to create the game that you want and the experience that you want for the players, provided that everybody has the buy-in that you're building that story together. And so there have been so many times where, like you said, I've like rolled an attack roll, or I've, done something dice based and the character should have died, or, something awful should have happened. But turns out that they actually have a really good idea plan, and I don't want a poor dice roll to have totally discouraged that. And so I'll say, yep, you sure did make it, or yep, you sure did hit that guy, or I'll just on the fly lower somebody's AC 1 or 2 points or something like that, because it's all about the experience. And like I said, as long as it's not organized play, you as the GM should absolutely feel empowered to do that whenever you.
And even organized play has its own caveats for like creative solutions. So if there's something that kind of falls in between numerous rules, or would be a reinterpretation of a rule that is kind of in the player's benefit because they came up with just the right idea. Yeah, I mean, there's some leeway to just roll with it.
I've got a Twitch chat question from Hippos Ate My Mommy. What advice do you have for GMs that want to come up with their own homebrew campaign settings? So that, I imagine that that's probably a big undertaking, but since you guys essentially at one point kind of had to do this whole campaign setting creation, what about somebody who wants to do one of their own? Any advice?
You want to take that one?
I can start with it. One of them is to basically establish what your scope is early on. You don't have to create the entire world to begin with. All you really need is a corner of a country or a little town, and know if I go north, I reach this terrain type. If I go west, I reach this terrain type. And then I know that I want to have some goblins over here, and I want there to be a kobold conspiracy. Great. You can use that as the starting point of your campaign and just build out organically from there. You don't have to create an entire 200-page reference document for your homebrew setting to make everything click together. Not only is that probably too much information for you, it's also probably information your players are never going to care about as much as you do. So provide some of the material. If they are interested in co-creating with you as you go, great. The first character have a dwarf PC. Maybe they decide what is true about dwarves, and everybody just sort of nods, and you come up with a cool story together. You can do this organically. You can do it prescriptively. It's your call, but you don't need to start big.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, especially, a lot of folks who are doing homebrew are often pressed for time, especially, get older and you have more responsibilities in your life. You don't have the time to sit down and write out all of this extra stuff that is never going to see the light of day in your campaign. When I was first playing as a pretty young teenager, I used to home everything just because it was fun for me to come up with the different stories and countries and characters and base it on certain things. And I played in another friend of ours game where everything was homebrewed, so I was sort of riffing off some of the stuff that he was doing. But I lost the ability and the time to do that just with normal life responsibilities as they came up. And so I think John has the nail on the head with sketching in those small details and really making your world come alive as your PCs are exploring it, and filling in some of those larger details organically from there is really going to make the PCs feel like that they are interacting with this world that you've created. And it's also going to make you look like you're super smart because you have all the little details about what everything looks like, when in reality you're just kind of going on the fly. And
something that works for homebrew GMing that it does not work in publication is you can steal everything. And
yeah.
It's like, I've decided that I really like the Dragon Age setting. Mm-hmm. I'm going to just steal an entire continent here, or I'm going to take the underlying basis of these two countries' war with each other, or whatever. You can do that, and maybe your players will notice and say, wait, isn't this right? And maybe you nod and wink. Maybe you say, how dare you call out my my clever thievery, but whatever it is, like you can grab whatever ideas you want to create stories and places.
I actually really like, I was just going to say to Amanda, I really like that you were mentioning that you had less time to world build when adult responsibilities got in the way. So it looks like you've decided to make world building your adult responsibilities in general, so that you don't have that problem anymore.
Yeah, that is true. And now all the world building that I do is all stuff that Paizo owns. But it's super fun. It's such a great thing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, with all that stuff, stealing from whatever sources that you can find. I did some of that from books that I had read, and I was telling my dad all about the stories that I ran them through, and he goes, "That's from that book." That's from that. That's,
Yeah.
I think
that
I'm
was
being
one of the-
really creative here, Dad. Goodness.
That was one of the kind of infuriating things when I was first starting on Starfinder and doing Starfinder Society storylines was we would pitch a story and we would get one of the Starfinder team saying, that's Star Trek. Okay, well, what about this one? That's also Star Trek. What about this one?
Yeah.
That's also Star Trek. And eventually we had to just come to the conclusion, and we've kind of tested this out through play, is that, yes, it's great to have completely original stories, but to an extent, when you have this new system, people also want to have that pre-made adventure where you can just say, I'm going to go play Alien. All right?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to go
Right.
play Alien for 4 hours. Whatever it is, and work with one of those tropes rather than trying to avoid all of them, because you won't miss every landmine.
I had a comment, I believe this is back when we were talking about interpreting rules as they are written, from Dustin Sherbarth. It's the beauty of rules is how we interpret them. Whether it be verified in legal terms or in terms of what is best for the game and group, I think the point in the decision making as a GM is what makes the game enjoyable. And I think that's something that you guys over at Paizo are always so quick to point out in your published material. It's like, look, here are the rules. Take them or leave them or do whatever you want. Just go have fun and have a good game. And I really like that about what you guys put out, is that you guys are so open about just go forth and play and have fun, you know?
Yeah, at no point are we going to send one of our employees to your house and kick in the door and say, no, you're doing it wrong.
Good. That was one of my
There's no
fears.
wrong,
so.
bad, fun.
Well, if you're broadcast, it's a different story. Then we can get on the comments feed and tell you straight up.
Oh no, the fans themselves definitely step up and say when we're doing something wrong.
Well, don't worry, we are let know.
We hear about it.
Yeah, we tried to play the adventure card game once, and I had only briefly looked over the rules, and I was the only one in the room who had any idea what was going on, and we had the comments in the chat were just like, no, every time I wanted to do something. Like, I don't know, guys, we're just getting through.
We're just playing games.
Yeah. So I don't know that, Ben, you'll have a lot of opinion because you've just started GMing, but something that I've run into a couple times because I've been GMing for a long time, and I'm sure that you guys, Amanda and John, have. At what point do you leave a stagnant campaign behind? And the reason that I ask that is because there have been multiple times in my experience where the game is going great, and then adult responsibilities kick in and you're trying to schedule it and nothing happens and months go by and we haven't met. And I think there's that point at which you don't, you want to play. Do you start over? Do you just scrap it because it's been too long? Or do you try to revive that campaign that you were playing maybe 6 months ago without meeting? What do you guys tend to feel on that? And how long do you guys let things go before you're just like, nah, we got to start fresh if we're going to sit down at the table again?
Yeah, so my advice for something like this, and I say advice mostly because this is always the idea that I have, and it often doesn't work, or the campaign ends because I moved to Seattle to go work for Paizo and it's not viable to do this. But when you have that type of situation, I think it's probably happened to everybody where, somebody has a reason they can't play for a while, the group sort of falls out of contact with each other, and then for whatever reason you're trying to get it back together. Rather than just stopping the momentum that you had from the campaign before and starting something new and having them make new characters, if everybody's on board for it, I think it's a really good idea to not necessarily continue with the same storyline that you did, but maybe do something that is essentially a one-off, but is still somehow related to that campaign, to get them bought back into whatever it is that you're doing. And a number of Paizo adventure paths and Paizo adventures and things that are in areas that are adjacent to somewhere else, so that it is a little more organic, that you can kind of plug different things in there, to help revive a campaign. But I think it would be a really good idea to, do a little one-shot or a Pathfinder Society scenario that's sort of set somewhere close to where your campaign was taking place, or, something that's a tie-in to an adventure path, that's what you were playing. And, get the players sort of excited and invigorated again about that story that you're telling, and bring in maybe some of the NPCs and sort of do a little bit of rejiggering as a GM, and sort of see if the players are excited again, and that can help remind them of, oh yeah, that's right, this NPC's sister was plotting with this other NPC, and stop them. We never figured out how to stop them. Or, you know, this terrible murder took place and we never figured out what actually happened. And that can get them excited again about it. Another sort of piece of advice that I actually did do during long-running campaigns and continue to is after every session within a week or so, I would write up basically a campaign log in the form of an email, and I would copy all of the players. Yeah, and it would be a chronological, almost fictionalized version of what the characters actually did. With, like, you know, the names of NPCs bolded and stuff. And I started just sort of doing that on a whim, and every time, and every campaign that people were like, that was super helpful. I was able to read that back over before the session, and I got really excited about what we did, and you reminded me of that stupid thing, you know, that this other character did, and then this other weird NPC, I don't know what's going on with them. So, like, anything you can do to sort of pick and pull at the threads of their interest in the narrative structure is a good way to get people back into a campaign. When, you know, life happens and things have gone off the rails, as opposed to just starting new. It's never bad to just start new, but if you are very invested in the GM, as the GM, in the story that you were telling, I think that is a good way to approach it.
And you have to ask yourself, why is there this stagnation? Is it because life events are making it meet? Is it because people are getting tired of the storyline or the part of the storyline they're in? Like, you might have reached a point where it's nothing but one long dungeon crawl that's going to last for, you already know that's going to 30 encounters. And people are clearly looking for somebody to talk to. Please, just anything but another door. And so it might be a matter of not canceling the campaign, but rather fast forwarding in some way. Skip some of those encounters, introduce some way of breaking up the pattern. It might be that things are stagnating, or people are starting to become lax in their attendance because maybe there's a social issue. Maybe it's one of the players is becoming particularly contentious, and the game with that person there is no longer being fun. It's a matter of you as the GM, as the social arbiter, need to step in and either help resolve you, or you need to do what a lot of groups have trouble with, which is make a realistic decision of, do we need to change what our membership is? But it's always a matter of canceling the campaign. Sometimes it's just a matter of identifying what the problem is, and from there you can come up with any number of solutions that could be right for your group.
Excellent points. I had another question that just popped up from the chat. We have one from Michael Ralston Galvis. As GMs, what are your favorite monsters to pit against your group?
I personally, in my campaign that I ran, anything that could really just flip the switch on them in mid combat, anything that went from one creature to another. So one of my favorite things that I ran had a doppelganger, being an NPC that they had grown somewhat close to, and then all of a sudden in the bottom of a sewer they found him, and it switched into it switched into the doppelganger right in front of their eyes, and just a jaw drop moment. And it's really those fun characters that can make your players really lose their minds and themselves be stuck in their own imagination because they're seeing things so differently. Those are the characters that I really love.
Awesome. John, Amanda, any
I really
like
the sort of monsters. Yeah, the ones I really enjoy are the monsters that aren't just always one way. Like, you open the door, there is a skeleton there. There's no talking there. There is simply rolling initiative and bashing its head apart. Whereas some creatures like Otyugs, for example, or a bunch of different devils are ones where fighting is not always the answer. Sometimes it's a matter of needing to make some sort of deal. Or, especially the case for Otyugs, it's, wait, this thing can talk? And suddenly you've completely changed the tables on the player's expectations because you've taken that seems like it should be one type of encounter, you've turned it into the other. Especially if you can add some sort of moral choice in there, or you can make the players feel really guilty if they attack the thing. Like, there's a scenario out there where there are monkeys, they're stealing your stuff. You can throw rocks at them, but then you make enemies of all the monkeys. And now you just feel guilty because you had to go and kill a bunch of monkeys. You monsters.
You jerk.
I know. And they get to live with those ramifications because they made those choices. All you did as a GM was set those monsters up.
Yeah, I really enjoy using monsters that are probably technically considered classical types of monsters, but adding some sort of or describing them in a way where it's not entirely clear at the first encounter and the first time the players come upon them what exactly they are. Changing, mundane physical characteristics, swapping out some spell-like abilities or supernatural abilities with something else, basically making variant versions of higher level monsters, or at lower levels explaining things very viscerally instead of just you meet a kobold, like you meet a little scaly humanoid that has a snout and he's got a dagger that's made of jagged piece of bone, and he's wearing boots that are like made up of rags with little skull fetishes tied on them, and he's running at you and he's got 4 little buddies behind him, and just playing up that sort of description, and then the players are just like invariably, oh no, my gosh, what is this thing? Well, maybe it's a goblin, I don't know, maybe it's a kobold, and it's like, and they're like, what do we know about these? And then that's when I'm like, I don't know, roll me a knowledge local, maybe you know, maybe you don't. And then it's just really fun to sort of work with what they're able to figure out, and works better with players who don't know the entire bestiary by heart, but sometimes it also is really fun to do that with veteran players, to confuse them and try to get them to actually play the game and not the numbers.
And sometimes it's just a matter of describing a room and letting your players invent what's going to jump out at them for you. One of the college campaigns that I ran, there was a room of taxidermied creatures, and I described one of those creatures as being a spine monkey. I figured it would be a monkey with like some spikes on its shoulders or something like that, like all the dinosaurs were in the art. And they decided, no, this is like some sort of supernatural monkey thing that like can jump on people and tear out their spines and use it like a flail. And they screech at people and like the skin comes off of their head, and all these terrible stories. It's like, oh, these guys, oh God. And so it's always great when the players' imaginations just spell their own doom, because they have such better ideas than I do.
It's so much fun to take that almost storyteller aspect to a D20 game, where if you have a group that is going through a dungeon and they're maybe sort of getting bored, and you can tell they're starting to check their phones and they're losing interest in the game, to just take something that is maybe not super consequential to the plot as written and sort of ask them what exactly is happening. They're in a dungeon and they put their hand in this gross greasy water and they're like, oh, this is nasty, what do I feel? And it's like, you feel a little prick. And they're like, oh, a prick, oh my gosh, what is that? And it's like, I don't know, what do you think it is? And then they come up with these weird things that it doesn't matter, it's just like a greasy hole in the floor. But,
but it could be this thing, or it could be this thing. You sort of sit there and watching sagely, and as they come up with like their 7th theory, you just say, roll me a fortitude save.
It's so much fun to do that, because that instantly gets them back into the game, and it sort of solves that problem of people starting to get disengaged.
Yeah.
And then, yes, that was my idea all along.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, right? It makes you look super smart.
Oh, man.
That is awesome.
I definitely like my monsters to be... you're obviously going to find those situations where you need monsters of low intelligence to run up and the group just needs to bash and smash everything and have a victory once in a while. But definitely the monsters that I enjoy running are the intelligent ones that have plot reasons behind why they're there, that have these really heartfelt emotional sort of things as to why they are different. I mean, I ran them up against a couple of goblins, but I made the goblins in love with each other, and so when they killed them very easily, and then they started searching around on the bodies and they found love notes to each other, and then they felt horrible for what they did. And it's those type of situations.
Person, you.
It's those type of situations that have plot-driven, unique aspects about these characters that I really enjoy. I'm a story guy.
Yeah,
I like story.
Super cool.
Well, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I think we all are.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that's why we do this, is to tell amazing stories. I would love to sit here and talk to you guys for hours and hours about, running games and all the various stories we've told together as players and GMs, but sadly, we are coming to the end of our time. I wanted to say that before we go, I want to thank you all so much for making the time to chat with us today. I'd also like to take the opportunity to give you each a moment to shout out anything that you might be working on currently, where viewers can find you, or where viewers can find you on social media. John, let's start with you. Is there any project that you're currently working on that you would like to talk about right now? And or if you want to announce where people who have more questions can reach you via Twitter or Facebook or wherever you like to inhabit the internet.
Sure thing. I keep a close eye on the organized play message boards on Paizo.com. I'm also available on Twitter at Archeotug, ARCHAEOTAGH. Right now I'm working on one of our next Pathfinder Society scenarios, which is called The Lion's Justice. This is the end of our Sovereign Court faction of the season. And one of the great things about it is that it's also leading into the action of our next adventure path, War for the Crown, in which you are basically running a coup and helping your candidate become the next Queen of Taldor.
Sounds awesome.
So yep, all sorts of fun there.
Very cool. Amanda, anything you got going on?
Yeah, so first of all, folks can find me on Twitter at Amanda Hamon. That's Hamon. I talk a lot about there and throughout character concept ideas and fun stuff like that. One of the projects I'm working on right now that I'm really excited about is a Nadal campaign setting book. It's called Nadal Land of Shadows. And I'm super excited because the author of about half of that book is Leanne Merciel, who is a Pathfinder Tales novelist who has done the canon essentially Nadal and what that country is like, and it's one of our darker nations. It's a theocracy in which they worship an evil god, and so it's just really interesting to do the world building in there and to see, what living in an evil theocracy looks like, and the struggles that happen between the common folk and the clergy and all of those little threads in there. So that is super cool. And also, John and I just wanted to give a quick shout out. We both have concurrent Starfinder Adventure Path modules that just came out. He has Temple of the 12, that's the second volume, and I've got Splintered Worlds that just came out in December.
That sounds awesome. That is amazing to hear. I will definitely have to check some of that stuff out. Lastly, before we go though, a big issue that I hear about a lot, and I'm sure my guests do as well, is that for one reason or another, many people don't have a group to play with. We'd like to help in any small way we can, so send us your looking for group info. If you're having trouble, and we might give it if you're having trouble finding a group, send us your info and we will give you a shout out in next week's episode of Party Up with Paizo. Maybe find you some new friends to play with. Ben, I know I skipped you because you don't have any big projects you're working on, Ben.
Big plans.
You have no big plans. Say your
plan.
Twitter handle, because in 30 seconds they're gonna cut me off and they're gonna I'm gonna get in big trouble.
Look, it's Ben Burch. You catch me here every Friday night. Sir Quigley is gonna rule the world. I'm also gonna be in this year running 3 groups, GMing 3 groups, and that's exciting. Definitely running Rise of the Rune Lords. Very excited.
Fantastic. Big thank you once again to Paizo Publishing, John, Amanda, and Ben for lending your expertise to this week's show. Give them a shout out on your preferred social media platform and let them know how much you enjoyed Party Up. Hopefully, I'll see you all Friday night for our next episode of Dragons and Stuff at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at facebook.com/dragonsandstuff. Until then, please keep the questions and comments coming and tag any of your friends looking for new GM strategies. Evil GM Jam out. Bye.